Imagine being a world-renowned actor known for your kindness, humility, and untouchable reputation. You're used to the red carpets, the millions of fans, and the admiration from people everywhere. But one day, you're invited to a talk show. The kind of show where celebrities come to chat, laugh, and promote their latest projects. It seems like a simple, routine appearance until you walk into the studio. What happens when a rude, arrogant talk show host, someone who believes they can push anyone around, decides to pick on you? What if, for just a moment, they think they can embarrass you in front of millions, humiliate you with their questions, and make you squirm? They think it's all just fun and games. But what if, in that instant, they make the biggest mistake of their career? Keanu Reeves, the man who's built a legacy on being one of the nicest guys in Hollywood, steps onto that stage, calm and collected, as he always is. But this time, things aren't going to go the way anyone expects. The host, a smug, self-important figure, throws out a cutting remark, hoping to provoke a reaction. And for a moment, it seems like Keanu might just take the bait. But Keanu's about to show the world something no one could have anticipated. It's not anger, not frustration. It's something far more powerful. In the blink of an eye, the tables turn. The host's arrogance melts away, and the audience can sense it. This is no ordinary confrontation. This is something that will go down in TV history. A moment where the nicest guy in Hollywood teaches a lesson no one saw coming. And the host? Well, they're about to learn the hard way. You don't mess with Keanu Reeves. Keanu Reeves had built his entire career on one simple principle: kindness. He was the actor who'd drop everything to help someone in need, the star who always took time to greet fans, and the person whose humility stood in stark contrast to the glitzy world of Hollywood. He wasn't just an action hero. He was a man who had earned the love and respect of millions, not because of his fame, but because of his character. But the world wasn't always kind in return. The talk show industry, especially those primetime gigs, was full of egos, competition, and the kind of sensationalism that thrived on tearing down the people it elevated. The hosts, they were often people who saw their own worth defined by how much they could provoke, how much they could make someone squirm for a laugh, or how many headlines they could create by pushing the boundaries of decency. Enter the talk show host in this story. Known for his sharp tongue and the way he could push celebrities into uncomfortable corners, he'd made a name for himself by playing the villain. It was all for the ratings, of course. The more uncomfortable the guest, the more dramatic the encounter, the more viral the segment would become. He'd built his empire on humiliating others for his own amusement. And for years, he got away with it. Keanu, of course, had heard the stories. He wasn't a stranger to the reality of late-night television, where hosts often tried to tear down the stars they invited for a simple conversation. But he didn't mind. He had dealt with worse in his personal life: loss, betrayal, and heartbreak, and he had emerged from it all stronger, calmer, and more grounded than ever. So, when his publicist booked him for this particular show, he had no hesitation. It would be just another stop on his promotional tour. Another chance to smile, share some stories, and talk about his latest project. What Keanu didn't know was that this host had a different agenda. He wasn't interested in promoting Keanu's new film. No, his goal was something much more personal. The host had recently been on a downward spiral. His ratings were slipping, his relevance in the industry was waning, and he was desperate for a comeback. He saw in Keanu a perfect target. Keanu's reputation as the nicest guy in Hollywood made him an easy mark. The host figured that by pushing Keanu, by attempting to expose a crack in his perfect image, he could spark a viral moment that would catapult him back into the spotlight. The host was ready to go all in. His plan? A casual remark about Keanu's personal life, a question designed to poke at a sensitive spot. Something that would make the audience gasp. Something that would shake Keanu out of his usual calm demeanor. It wasn't about curiosity or genuine interest. It was about control. The host wanted to show everyone that even the good guys could be broken, that no one was untouchable. And so, the stage was set. The lights were bright, the audience was eagerly awaiting, and Keanu took his seat, giving his trademark smile to the camera. He had no idea that this moment, this seemingly innocent appearance, would turn into a battle he hadn't prepared for. The host, with his smooth, practiced delivery, opened the conversation with all the typical pleasantries. Small. Talk about Keanu's career, his projects, the usual fluff. But then, after a few minutes, he shifted gears. His tone became sharper, more provocative. Keanu, you've been called the nicest guy in Hollywood for years now. It's your trademark, right? But tell me, does it ever get old? The constant pressure to be perfect, to be the good guy. Do you ever just want to break out and be, well, a little more real? Keanu chuckled lightly, his eyes twinkling with the kind of genuine amusement that made him so beloved. But the host wasn't finished. I mean, with all the rumors around you about your personal life, don't you ever just feel like snapping? Maybe it's time for Keanu to let loose. Stop pretending like you've got it all figured out, the host continued, his voice now dripping with mock sympathy. The audience shifted uncomfortably. Keanu's expression remained unchanged, but the air in the room thickened. This wasn't a casual interview anymore. This was an attack, and the host was enjoying it far too much. It was the kind of moment that could make or break a person. Many in Keanu's position might have taken the bait, snapped back with a biting retort, maybe even stormed off the stage. After all, who wouldn't be tempted to fight back when they were being unnecessarily provoked? But Keanu, as always, held steady. He'd faced far worse in life and had learned that letting the anger take hold only gave your opponent the power they didn't deserve. But the unfairness of it all was undeniable. Here was a man who had worked tirelessly for decades to build an image of kindness, humility, and generosity. He had earned the love of millions not through fame, but through his actions, his willingness to help, and his refusal to be a part of the Hollywood machine that often valued drama over decency. And yet, here he was, being reduced to a spectacle for someone else's gain. The audience could feel the tension. They could see Keanu's restraint, but they also knew what the host was trying to do, what he was hoping for. This was not an interview. This was a battle for control, a struggle for dominance in a world that often chewed people up and spit them out when they didn't conform to its expectations. The injustice of it all simmered just below the surface. The host, safe behind his microphone and camera, had the power to shape this moment however he liked. He could twist Keanu's words, manipulate the narrative, and reduce a man who had been nothing but kind into a punchline. The real question wasn't whether Keanu would snap. It was whether he could stand firm in the face of such blatant provocation, such disrespect. And as the words lingered in the air, the unfairness festered. It wasn't just about Keanu anymore. It was about every time someone had been torn down for the sake of entertainment. Every time a person's worth had been reduced to a soundbite or a headline. It was about the cruelty of a world that often saw people as pawns in a game, rather than human beings with dignity and feelings. But little did the host know, he was playing a dangerous game. Keanu sat there, his hands resting calmly on his lap, his face betraying nothing of the storm that churned inside him. The audience was waiting, their eyes flicking between him and the host, who now wore a smug grin, clearly enjoying the discomfort he'd just created. The host's words hung in the air, as cutting as they were calculated. It wasn't just a question anymore. It felt like an accusation, a challenge. And Keanu, he was the target. But the worst part wasn't the attack itself. It was the realization that the host's words, the underlying message, were designed to strip away everything he had worked so hard to maintain. His kindness, his reputation as the humble, down-to-earth man in a world full of egos. The world had built him up on a pedestal, and now someone wanted to knock him off for the sake of a cheap laugh. Keanu had been through a lot in his life. He'd experienced loss, the kind that could have destroyed anyone else. He'd had relationships falter, his personal life become the subject of whispers and rumors, the very same ones the host was now alluding to. And yet, through it all, he had remained grounded. He had chosen to rise above the darkness, to keep his head high, even when life tried to pull him under. But as the host pressed on, as his questions became more invasive, more personal, Keanu couldn't help but feel something shift deep within him. It wasn't just the words themselves, it was the intention behind them. The host wasn't interested in a genuine conversation. He wasn't even trying to understand Keanu. No, the host was trying to break him, trying to prove a point, namely, that no one could remain the nice guy forever. That, in the world of talk shows, kindness was a weakness, and that realization, as small as it seemed, struck Keanu with the force of a tidal wave. For a split second, he questioned his own resolve. Was he really powerless in this moment? Was this the price he had to pay for living his truth, for being the one person in Hollywood who wouldn't fall into the trap of anger or bitterness? The host's voice cut through his thoughts, a sharp edge in every syllable. It must be exhausting, pretending like you have it all together, Keanu. Don't you get tired of playing the saint all the time? Or do you think people really buy it? The whole nice guy act? Keanu's jaw tightened. The words felt like a slap. He could feel his chest tightening, the urge to snap back rising within him. It would be so easy to tear into the host, to finally let the frustration and anger take hold, to show the world that he wasn't just the nice guy. He was a person, with his own limits, his own breaking points. He could feel the pressure building inside him, like a dam ready to burst. But then, just as quickly, he let it go. Keanu had learned long ago that responding in anger wouldn't solve anything, that fighting back in the way the host wanted would only give the man what he wanted, control of the moment. But it wasn't just about that. It was about something deeper, something Keanu had come to understand after all the years of hardship and public scrutiny. It was about dignity, about not letting someone else define who you were, no matter how hard they tried to push. But as the seconds ticked by, the tension only grew. Keanu could feel the eyes of the audience on him, the weight of their expectation pressing down. They were waiting for something, waiting for him to either break or rise above. He could feel their anticipation, could sense the shift in the room. As the host continued to prod, his questions now more pointed, more invasive. The host wasn't done yet. He was determined to get a reaction, any reaction. It was in this moment, this heavy silence, that Keanu realized something. The host, for all his bravado, was weak. The host's need for validation, for control, was the true weakness in the room. Keanu wasn't the one losing power here. It was the host who had to resort to humiliation and cruelty to feel important. The power was already shifting, and Keanu could feel it deep in his gut. The more the host pushed, the more the audience would see who the real villain was. And in that instant, everything changed. Keanu didn't need to raise his voice. He didn't need to snap back with a cutting remark or resort to the same tactics that had worked for the host in the past. No, Keanu realized that his silence, his calm, was the most powerful weapon he had. By not responding the way the host expected him to, by not falling into the trap of aggression or defensiveness, Keanu was already reclaiming control of the moment. The host's smirk faltered for just a second, and it was enough to make Keanu's resolve harden. The man thought he could break him, expose him as something less than perfect. But Keanu wasn't going to give him that satisfaction. Instead, Keanu made a choice, one that would change everything. He wasn't going to fight back with words. He wasn't going to let the host turn this into the spectacle he so badly wanted. Keanu would take the high road. But that didn't mean he was going to let this man walk away without realizing the full extent of his mistake. The host's grin returned, but it was weaker now, as if he sensed that the game was starting to slip out of his hands. Keanu's response was slow, deliberate, almost as if he were savoring the moment. He wasn't just thinking about his next words, he was thinking about how to expose the host's shallow game, how to make the audience realize that the host's desperation was what truly made him pathetic. And in doing so, Keanu knew that he had already won. The host, in his thirst for power and attention, had unwittingly set the stage for his own downfall. The tension in the room had reached its peak. The moment of truth was coming. The audience waited, breath held, as Keanu prepared to respond, not with anger, but with the quiet strength that had made him a legend. The host, for all his arrogance, was about to learn that Keanu Reeves wasn't someone to be played with. The air in the studio was thick with anticipation. Keanu's response hung in the balance, and the audience seemed to hold their breath, waiting for the inevitable release of tension. The host, a man who had thrived on chaos and control, looked smug, too smug, believing he had cornered the nicest guy in Hollywood. The audience had seen the moment when Keanu's calm had faltered, when the pressure had seemed to crack his unshakable demeanor. They were waiting for the explosion, for the retaliation that had to come. They weren't expecting what happened next. Keanu's voice broke the silence, but it was quiet, controlled, and steady. He didn't rise to the bait. Instead, he chose something far more dangerous: silence, mixed with a single, simple question. "You really want to know, don't you?" The host's eyebrows shot up, clearly taken aback by the turn in the conversation. The smugness on his face started to fade, replaced by curiosity. He thought he had it all figured out. But now, there was a shift. The power dynamic was beginning to crumble. He was no longer the master of the situation, and the audience could feel it. Keanu had given him nothing but calm, a calm that spoke volumes more than any angry retort could have. It was as if the question had opened a door the host had never considered, a door that led to a truth he had never imagined. "You think I don't have it all together?" Keanu continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "But that's not the problem, is it?" The host didn't respond at first, caught off guard by the sudden depth of Keanu's words. Keanu was doing something that no one had ever done before. He wasn't playing the game the way the host expected. He wasn't trying to salvage his reputation or claim control through witty banter or a sharp comeback. No, Keanu was doing something more powerful. He was shifting the narrative, making the host confront something much deeper than the surface-level drama he had hoped to provoke. The host, realizing that Keanu was taking the conversation in a direction he wasn't prepared for, hesitated. He had expected anger, frustration, something loud, something that would give him control. But instead, Keanu was making him look small, and he knew it. "You think I'm perfect," Keanu said softly, almost as if speaking to himself. "But that's not the truth. The truth is, I'm just like everyone else. I make mistakes. I have my struggles. I'm not above the things you think you can expose." The audience, unsure of where this was going, was hooked. Keanu was peeling back the layers, not just of himself, but of the entire industry. The host had spent his career exposing the flaws and cracks in others, but now Keanu was exposing him and everyone else in that room. He was revealing something the host had never expected: vulnerability. And that vulnerability was more disarming than any insult could have been. "You want to know what it's like to be Keanu Reeves?" he asked, his voice still calm but with a hint of something more. "It's about showing up every day, doing the work, and treating people with respect. No matter what happens, no matter how hard it gets, you don't stop being a decent person. That's what makes me who I am. Not the fame, not the movies. It's the choices I make every single day." The host's smile had completely vanished. His mouth was dry, his thoughts scrambling as Keanu's words began to sink in. The audience, who had been waiting for a fight, now saw something entirely different. The host had spent his career prying into the lives of others, humiliating them for sport. But now, in this moment, he was the one who was being exposed. He wasn't in control anymore. Keanu was. Keanu leaned forward just slightly, his gaze never leaving the host. "You think you know me. You think you can get under my skin with cheap shots. But here's the thing you don't get. You've never seen me truly angry. You've only seen me when I'm calm. And you've underestimated that." The host blinked, confusion and realization settling in. This wasn't the Keanu he thought he knew. This wasn't the nice guy, who would meekly accept whatever verbal assault was thrown his way. This was a man who had seen it all, who had learned to let the petty attacks roll off his back, but who also knew how to fight in a way that no one expected. Keanu's voice dropped to a lower register, the weight of his words heavier than before. The truth is, the people you pick on, people like me, people who have learned how to endure, they're not weak. They're strong in ways you'll never understand. And when you think you've won, when you think you've broken them, they're just getting started. The host took a step back, now fully aware of the shift in power. He wasn't the one holding the cards anymore. He had thought he could control the narrative, force Keanu into a position where he could make him look like a fool. But instead, he had revealed his own insecurities, his need to belittle others to lift himself up. Keanu's words cut deeper than any insult could have. The audience, who had been on the edge of their seats, now saw the role reversal in full force. The host, who had spent his career tearing people down for the sake of entertainment, was now the one being exposed. And the tables had turned completely. Keanu had done something remarkable. He had not only shifted the power dynamic, he had exposed the host for what he truly was. A man hungry for attention, willing to humiliate others to feel relevant. But Keanu, in his quiet strength, had done something far more powerful. He had shown that true strength wasn't in domination, but in restraint, in not stooping to the level of those who sought to break you. As the host stood there, stunned, the audience could feel it. The moment had changed. The fight, once expected to be explosive, had become something much more profound. It wasn't about the words anymore. It was about the silence, the calm before the storm, and the realization that Keanu Reeves had already won. The host might have thought he had all the control, but the truth was, Keanu had been 3 steps ahead all along. And now, the host was the one left to pick up the pieces of his own shattered ego. The host stood there, his mouth agape, as Keanu's final words echoed in the studio. For a moment, there was only silence. The kind of silence that screams louder than any words could. The audience, once eager for conflict, now sat in stunned awe, processing what had just happened. They had come expecting to see Keanu squirm, to watch him unravel under the weight of the host's mockery. But instead, they had witnessed a man of humility and strength dismantle his antagonist with nothing more than quiet conviction. The host, for all his bravado and years of dominating the conversation with sharp jabs, was now the one left unsteady, shaken to his core. His mind raced as he tried to process what had just occurred. He had come into this interview thinking that he could control Keanu, that he could expose some vulnerability, some hidden flaw. But in the end, it was his own weakness that had been exposed. His hunger for attention, his desperate need to humiliate others for the sake of his own ego. Those were the true flaws that had come to light. Keanu's words had been simple, but they hit hard. They had peeled back the layers of the host's persona, revealing the emptiness beneath. In trying to break Keanu, the host had only succeeded in exposing himself as a man who craved power through manipulation. And it wasn't long before the audience began to see it too. The shift was palpable as whispers started to spread among the crowd. The same people who had once laughed at the host's jabs now began to feel uncomfortable, their respect for him evaporating with every passing second. Keanu, on the other hand, stood tall, his demeanor unchanged. He didn't need to gloat. He didn't need to rub the host's failure in his face. The satisfaction wasn't in revenge. It was in knowing that in that moment, the host had been held up to the light for who he truly was. It was poetic justice. The host had wanted to expose a crack in Keanu's character, but in doing so, he had cracked open his own facade. The host's grip on the microphone tightened as his confidence crumbled. The energy in the room shifted. The audience was no longer waiting for the next insult, the next sarcastic remark. They were waiting for a resolution. They were waiting for the host to face the consequences of his actions. And Keanu had given them that, without a single raised voice, without a harsh word. He had allowed the host's own arrogance to be his downfall. And then it happened. The show's producer, a figure who had been nervously watching from the sidelines, stepped onto the stage. There was no mistaking the tension in the air now. Everyone knew something had shifted. The producer, sensing that the show had taken a turn for the worse, tried to maintain professionalism, but it was clear that the damage had been done. "We're going to have to cut this segment," the producer said, his voice shaking slightly. He glanced nervously at the host, who had now gone completely silent. "We're experiencing some technical issues, folks. Thank you all for watching." The host, still trying to regain his composure, nodded stiffly, but the damage was done. The show ended abruptly. The audience left feeling that they had witnessed something far more than just a television interview. They had seen a man of integrity expose the rot beneath the surface of someone who had spent years manipulating others for personal gain. Keanu didn't gloat. He didn't need to. He had made his point, and it was one the audience would carry with them long after the lights went down. He had shown them the power of silence, the power of restraint, and the power of knowing that, sometimes, the greatest strength lies in not fighting back. And as Keanu walked off the stage, his head held high, the host was left alone in the studio, his arrogance replaced by the bitter taste of his own defeat. The world didn't need to see Keanu's response. They had already seen everything they needed to. The host had exposed himself, and in doing so, had shown the world just how fragile the quest for power could be. In the days that followed, the clip of the interview went viral. It wasn't the dramatic confrontation everyone had expected. It was something more profound. The media, the fans, even the critics all took notice. They were talking about the strength it took for Keanu to remain composed, to let the host dig his own grave without saying a word. And the host, his reputation took a nosedive. He was the talk of the town, but not in the way he had hoped. The very thing he had sought, attention, had become his undoing. The moment he had tried to humiliate Keanu had turned into his own public humiliation. Keanu, meanwhile, had gained even more respect. Not because he had destroyed his antagonist, but because he had shown that true strength was not in dominance, but in dignity. His response to the host's cruelty wasn't one of retaliation. It was one of quiet justice. He had let the universe and the audience deliver the payback that was far more satisfying than any revenge could have been. In the end, Keanu didn't need to say anything more. His actions, his restraint, his unshakable integrity spoke louder than any words ever could. And as for the host, he learned the hard way that in a world where cruelty often masquerades as entertainment, true justice is served not by what you take from others, but by what you refuse to give in return. Keanu had walked away with his dignity intact, his reputation unscathed, and his fans' admiration soaring. The host, on the other hand, had learned a lesson he would never forget. Power wasn't about tearing others down. It was about lifting them up, and sometimes letting the truth do its work was the most powerful thing of all.